So it looks like, unfortunately, that, well, Sargon is back. After almost what had been, well, a number of years of Sargon trying to reaffirm and rebrand himself as not this rabid anti-feminist, the guy who said he wouldn't even rape a MP, when all of a sudden he then turned around, well, I might do if I had enough beer. Yeah, he's back, unfortunately, but he's rebranded himself. Over the past couple of years, Sargon has heavily focused on his um intellectualism, his faux intellectualism, because that's what it was. Sargon's channel always used to be this faux intellectualism, that he wasn't coming at the angle of politics as a right winger. He was just a classical liberal, meaning that he would be looking back at classical works from the past and re-examining them in contemporary beliefs and how everything and progress is bad. Well, he's back and he hasn't changed at all. He might be spouting a bit more fancier words, but to be honest, he's the exact same person as he ever was. Sargon has never, ever changed. And to be honest, I think I really need to um, expand on my time interacting with Sargon in the past as well, because I will admit it, I used to be a Sargon fan in the past. I was taken in by this. Now, certainly he's a lot more polished now than he used to be, but I think we need to start pushing back against the nonsense that Sargon and especially his new branding of the Lotus Eaters is coming out with. Because he has rebranded himself as, oh, we're just, classical libertarianisms. That's all we are. When in reality, he's pushing the most conservative possible things there are. So maybe in the future of this channel, we will probably do some more stuff. But hey, we'll be getting to that probably later. But anyway, before we go more diving into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page on an foundation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And of course, as always, thank you very much for all the support you guys show the channel. So my interactions with Sargon over the years, I think it's very well worth being sort of upfront and honest about this. I don't hide this. I have a lot of old videos talking about this. Are they embarrassing? Yes. But like anyone, I've changed over the years. Anyone has. And I know I have become a lot better than I used to be, but there's a whole reason and backstory. To be honest, I don't want to get too much into it because it's very personal. But needless to say, it was actually me joining JCI. And I will always say this, that JCI was a massive positive influence in my life. I am this year's UK president of JCI. And I'm certainly viewed my year as president as an opportunity to give back to an organization that I've gotten so much out of. And at the time, I remember Gamergate happening. I remember it kicking off. And I remember this, finding Sargon being shown with the algorithm, all the other guys who were whipping this up into a frenzy. And I still remember thinking, I even made a video saying, I don't really understand all this need, but it just seems to me that she had a really good marketing campaign and you guys are just filling that need for her to do it. And I agree with Stephanie Sterling, who at the time said, well, actually, Gamergaters do have somewhat of a point about integrity in journalism, but this whole abuse that is going on, this thing that it eventually morphed into, not only that, you combine this at this exact same time as we were seeing the skeptic community going from criticizing like the fundamentalist religious aspects that we saw from America, transitioning over to criticizing Islam. Now, there are, just as you can fairly criticize and critique the fundamentalist Christian worldview and the stuff that they do, you can criticize, the same thing for those aspects of the fundamentalist Christian, the fundamentalist Islamic world point of view as well. However, what started to be heavily noticed by a lot of people in the skeptic community that they were going, or at least certain individuals were going a lot harder. And it was going from this is legitimate criticism to, you know, the the view of the belief system about how this affects the real world, as you can say the same for Christian fundamentalism as well, started going very hard in a lot of, well, very, racist directions. Um, if people remember Edgy Sphinx and what happened uh, about that and that individual, if people remember that, that was a whole thing in the skeptic community. That's probably ringing a lot of bells for people at that time. But through that, I never really engaged in the whole Gamergate thing. I always thought it was a bit ridiculous. But that's sort of how I found Sargon. That's how I started watching some of his videos, watching his content. And then, and then there were things that put me off permanently about Sargon. First of all, the interview, the absolute softball interview he did with Tommy Robinson, where Tommy Robinson was saying, rewriting his history to Sargon, which a basic Google check would disprove of the stuff that he was saying. Sargon wasn't even giving him any pushback whatsoever. Sargon at that time was loving it because he was being heavily funded, even promoted by the EDL. You may remember the video. You've got to watch this guy called Sargon of Akkad. He's got some good ideas. And that's when I start to realize, well, hold on a second. Who am I watching? What kind of content am I absorbing from this guy? And that's what really started to make me think, because back in my university days when I was down in Leicester, I heavily was involved in a lot of the anti-EDL student protests that went on down in Leicester. So I remember those times, being involved in those, and some of the stuff that went on in there. I think I've told the story about one of my friends. He was an exchange. He was, from France, but he chose to study here. Walking home one day, speaking to his parents on the phone in French, jumped by two EDL thugs for not speaking English. Kind of something in a memory that sticks with you forever. To be honest, it still upsets me to this day that happened. But this, unfortunately, sort of really made me re-examine. And the final straw for me was realizing, and me stupidly thinking, that when it came to this Brexit debate, Sargon would never be for the Leave side. I mean, that's how much I think I had bought into this guy's content of what he was selling. And it was just those couple of triggers, the Tommy Robbins interview, and of course, him coming out heavily for the Leave campaign. Went over just a couple of weeks ago, the debate he had with Thunderfoot. And yeah, it just so bizarre that I fell for it. And it doesn't surprise me that other people would not fall for it as well. And even worryingly, even more so now. Just as you can see here, this is his new studio. This is a new studio. And I wouldn't be surprised if Sargon is getting heavily funded by some dark money think tanks. It would not surprise me in the least, because that's his whole purpose. Oh yes, we're going to do, some fun, fancy history videos. But meanwhile, we're going to talk about sort of how Black Panther is like secretly the BLM supremacist fantasy. You get the idea of what these guys are really pushing. It is, faux highbrow intellectualism, then with the secret, shall we say, conservative messaging just shoved underneath. And don't worry if you suddenly think, hey, isn't that slightly conservative? Don't worry, Sargon and of course his crew will be there to reassure you. We're not right wing, we're not conservatives, we're just classical libertarians. And of course, this is the new grift. And it highly, highly worries me that he has now not only reaffirmed and rechanged his whole image, but is now running, from all intents and purposes, and I'll agree with Lance's from the Surf's assessment from this, it looks like an Alex Jones studio. It looks like an Alex Jones studio. It really does. But yeah, needless to say, we are probably going to be looking every so often at the content that this guy and his um, stooges put out, because I think it needs a pushback. Because, like you've seen in America with the rise of um, things like Ben Shapiro, all those other right wing, heavily funded, astroturf think tanks, it's going to be coming out from here as well. So we have to, and I would call on anyone else who is in our sphere, from Phil to Graham to anyone else, start watching out for this guy, because wouldn't surprise me if this guy starts to pop up more and more often, because the fact that he's got this new studio, everything reeks to me of being heavily, heavily funded by the right wing. I think we have to have and start pushing back and start reminding people who this guy was and the crazy nonsense that him and his crew are going to start peddling. So we need to be aware and be aware of who this guy is. And like I say, his Wikipedia page is a perfect start to go after and reaffirm of all his past. Just because he's got this fancy new studio, it's still the same Sargon. It's still the same faux intellectualism wrapped up essentially as conservative propaganda. So beware, don't fall for it. I once did. It's something that really worries me to this day, that I fell for it so easily. But there are going to be others out there that are going to look at this studio and think, wow, isn't he isn't he smart in what he is saying, and not really listening to, unfortunately, the underlying message that he has, which is unfortunately pushing a very right wing, anti-change, um, genuine intellectual discussion that apparently this guy wants to have. There is a reason why he doesn't debate anymore, because he absolutely got trounced time and time again in many debates in the past. One with Kirsty Winters, of course, one with Vosh. Um, but yeah, watch out for this guy. Um, Certainly needs to be pushed back against a lot. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.